Hi and welcome to another video, everyone. This is Gina from McGuire, and I always appreciate you stopping by. Today I am sharing a fun card design that works with pretty much any stamps and many of the dies that you have. This is called a window surprise card. When looking at the card from the outside, you see just a small window with an image showing through, but when you open it up, there's more to it, and it's actually a trifold card. I have several examples for you today, and each shows a little bit of a variation on how to assemble the card, and I'm hoping that by seeing many examples, you can give this a try too. Let's start with this example first. For all of the cards, I start with a piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. I like to use a heavyweight cardstock, and this one happens to be Fawn Mermaid. I cut it in half, so I have two pieces that are 8.5 by 5.5. And I score it right down the middle at 4 1/4. I'm going to do that with both of the pieces that I've cut. And when I fold along those score lines, I end up with two note cards that are 4 1/4 by 5.5. This is how you make a typical note card. Each of today's cards need both of these note cards together. What we'll do is actually put them together to create the trifold design. There are a few other ways to do trifold cards, but I find this gives the best results. Now from each of the cards, you're going to cut a little sliver off of one of the sides. On the first card, I cut a little sliver off the back. From the other card, I'll do the same thing. Then we can take these cards and fit them together, and we won't have any pieces hanging off on the edge. They just fit together better if you do this. So let me freeze frame this here and show you how they go together. Right now I have my two note cards with the little sliver cut off the back. I'm going to take the card on the right and flip it over as you see me do here. Then they can go together and they'll fit together nicely. The back flap of the card on the right slides behind the back flap of the card on the left. You'll see me do this many times in this video, so don't worry if you missed it. But by cutting off those little slivers and putting them together this way, we're going to end up with a great trifold card. Before assembling the card, I'm going to stamp the front card with the Pink and Main Pattern Maker stamp set. This has lots of long images that are great for creating a pattern or a plaid on your note card. I'm just going to use the different stripes today. I'm putting them all together close up on the front note card. So this is the front of my card, and I'm using my MISTI stamping tool to save time. You can use a long acrylic block if that's what you have. Once I have a few of those stripe images together, I'm going to stamp it with Hero Art's Unicorn White ink. I love the look of this unicorn white ink on a colored cardstock. It gives a soft look that is really cool when you tilt it in the light. I thought about stopping here and leaving the stripes as you see right now. I thought that would look neat, but I decided to cover the card. So I'm shifting the card down in my MISTI so that I can repeat the stamping of the stripes on the top of the card, and then I'll stamp it on the bottom of the card too. This white shows up more on a darker color cardstock, but I like that it gives a subtle look on this medium color. And I'm going to heat set this so I don't have to worry about smearing it. Once I've done that, I'm using a Hero Arts Heart Infinity die to die cut a window on the front of the card. After I've done this, I can save that little heart for another project. We're just going to use the card itself. It's time to take our two cards and put them together to create the trifold effect. So I'm opening both of the cards. With the extra card that doesn't have the window, I'm putting adhesive on the inside. Any kind of strong adhesive will work, and you'll see me use a few different options today. I'm going to put that onto the back of our card that has the window cut. So now when those close together, we'll have a fun trifold look. I find that this method of creating a trifold card gives the best quality, and it's fun to have that added surprise inside. Now it's time to pick our stamped image to put in the window, and I'm using the new Pink and Main Sweet Bouquets stamp set. I really like the look of these two bouquets and the sentiments included. Off screen, I went ahead and stamped and colored one of these bouquets towards the top center of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock. You can see the results here. Now this piece is going to be glued right into the inside of this card, but I want to make sure that my image lines up with the heart window. So this piece is a little bit too big to go here, so I need to trim it back down a bit. I will show you another way of doing this later in the video. You could have done some pre-planning to make sure it was stamped in the right spot, but to be honest with you, I had stamped the image before making the card, so I just was winging it. So here I have lined up that image so it shows through the heart nicely. I then am making little pencil marks on this white piece so that I know where to cut it down, so that when I glue it on the inside of my card, a little bit of that blue cardstock shows off around the top, bottom, and sides. I'm using my Tim Holtz trimmer to carefully cut along those little pencil marks that I made. I find that this is something I do often when I want to center something up and make sure that I will be able to add it to a card with a nice mat showing around it. And again, I will show you a couple other ways to do this to make sure your image lines up through that window, just later on in this video. Okay, so now I can glue this to the inside of our card. You could use any kind of adhesive here. Just make sure you put it up close to the edge so it stays nice and secure. So now I can add this to that inside flap, and you can see some of that blue cardstock shows around the edges. And when we close our card, you see a peek of that bouquet. On the inside of the card itself, when I open it up completely, I'm gluing a piece of white cardstock. I just felt like this gave it a finished look, and that's where I'll write my personal message. I'm using an older Pink and Main stamp set for the sentiment on this card. This set has some fun bows that are great to add to images, and I like the sentiments. I stamped the "To My Sweet Friend" along a white cardstock strip. Now, looking through this window, there were some white areas towards the top that I wanted to kind of fill in, so I just drew tiny little circles with a black pen. And these kind of look like berries or whatever around our bouquet. I then added a little bit of yellow marker to the center of those little circles. And by the way, I colored those flowers with my Altenew artist markers. Okay, next I have adhesive on the two ends of my strip, and I'm using my T-roller to adhere it straight so that it suspends right across that window. So here's the finished card. You can see how those flowers show through the window. We have that subtle white stamping on the background and that sentiment strip that stretches across the heart window. But when you open it up, there's the surprise of a large bouquet and in addition to the sentiment. Then you can open it again and you'll see the large area where you can write a personal message. So you can see how this card design would work with a lot of different large stamped images, or you could combine a bunch of small images together. That's what I'm going to do in my next example. In this case, there was a stamp set that I've been dying to use for a while now, so I thought I would try it with this card design. I'm using the Pink and Main Crafty stamp set. This has lots of crafty images and sentiments, and I'm going to use many of them together to create kind of a background that you'll see when you open up the card. So I have a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock, and I'm putting it into my MISTI. And you'll notice that I have taped a large circle die onto that cardstock, and I'm arranging my images around it. The reason I put that circle die there is that's where my window will be. And I wanted to make it look like only a few images were in this card when the card's closed. So I'm putting all the other images around that circle so they're only seen when the card is opened. So I continue to reposition the images, stamp them with black ink, and then repeat. Once I have the entire piece covered, I can go ahead and do some quick coloring on it, and we have created our own background out of smaller images. Off screen, I created 2 Kraft note cards and cut off a little bit from one edge of each, just like I did in the earlier example. I have the front note card here and I'm opening it up. I need to figure out where to place that circle die. I should have done this first, but I didn't think of it at the time, so here's the trick that I did. I have a piece of tape that I'm taping to the top of my card. I'm going to center this piece right on the front of it just temporarily. Position the die in place. Then I'll fold that tape down so I can grab the die on the tape. I'll lift this up, remove our stamped piece, and then lay the die back down. That way I can be sure the die is positioned perfectly so that when I cut it from the front of the note card, you can see those images perfectly through it. Before assembling the card, I'm stamping onto the front of the card. This will actually stamp through the window, but that's okay because nobody will see that because we'll cover it up. So now I have a piece of white cardstock that's about 5 1/4 by 4 inches. I'm gluing that to the inside of the card. This is where we'll put our personal message. Now we can go ahead and glue the two cards together. They're both cut from Gina K Kraft cardstock. I'll glue the back of the second card onto the back of the first card. And there we have our trifold design. And finally, we can glue our Crafty piece to the flap so it shows through the window. Now, when I put this together, I decided I wanted the window to have a frame around it, and here's how I did it. I have black cardstock that I've already put Stick-It double-sided adhesive on the back of. I like to keep some of that on hand. I then took 2 circle dies. The inside die is the same size as our window, and then 1 size bigger. When I ran that through my die cut machine, I ended up with a perfect frame to go around our window. After pressing that firmly in place, I can be sure that it stays put. I finished off the card by adding a sentiment to the front. So you can see how that frame makes the card pop. When you open it up, you have this fun, colorful design. And then I also stamped another greeting and image on the inside. So if you have a bunch of small images, you can do this technique. If you have a large background stamp, you could even do this technique. It really works with a lot of things. For my next example, I decided to create a little scene on the inside of the card and create a large window on the front. I used the Pink and Main Sketched Easter stamp set. I thought these little critters were so cute, and the little banner that you can see on the top of the set. I'm going to use that banner for my sentiment, but decided not to make this an Easter card and instead used sentiments from the Pink and Main Hello Friend and Thanks to You stamp set. These are smaller sets with great sentiments, and there are coordinating dies available for those large words. I first wanted to show you how I created the banner and see how the sentiment kind of curves along with the banner. Here's the trick that I did for that. I've stamped the banner on some white cardstock, and I want the note to say to curve along with it. I take a piece of clear plastic and put it over the banner. Then when I hold my stamp in a curve, it'll stay there as I close the door on my stamping tool. I then can ink up my stamp and stamp it onto the plastic to make sure I like the results. When I stamped it here, I felt it was too far to the right, so I'm going to wipe off the plastic and move my stamp. Stamping first on plastic allows you to test it out. If you're not happy, you can change it. If you are happy with it, you just take the plastic away and then stamp it again right on the cardstock. So I've moved the stamp. I'm going to go ahead and stamp it on that plastic again just to test it out. Pretty happy with the results, so I'm going to go ahead and stamp that right onto the cardstock. I will then add 3 little dots with a pen. So anytime you want to try out stamping to see if you like the position, just use a clear piece of plastic to test it out first. Now I again did all of my stamping and coloring off screen. I did nothing fancy here, just created a little scene towards the top of a 4 by 5 1/4 inch piece of white cardstock. I did coloring with Altenew artist markers. I wanted to save the time in the video and focus on the card design itself, so I did the basic coloring off screen. You could do any kind of stamping. You could do colored stamping if you wanted to skip the coloring. Once I had my coloring done on this piece, I die cut a square from the front of a Kraft note card. And remember, I cut a little bit off the back of this card, just like I did on that first example that I showed you. And here you can see how when you peek through that square window, you see the cute little scene inside. So let's assemble the trifold card. And again, I prepared these 2 note cards as I did in my first example in this video. I'm putting glue on the inside of the second card, and I'll glue this to the back of our first card. There we have our simple trifold look. Now I can glue our little scene to the inside flap, and then I'm using foam tape to add that little banner right below our little square window on the front of the card. I also can't forget to stamp the rest of our sentiment, which you'll see when you open the card, and it says, "I appreciate you." So here's a look at the final card. This one has a bigger window that allows you to see more of the scene inside. And I even stamped an image on the inside of the card with a little bunny. Now, I think it would have been fun to do this card with a small window. So maybe all you would see is the cute little lamb or the bunny. It really just depends. You could have a tiny window on the front with the larger scene on the inside, but I decided to go with the larger window. Okay, my next example shows a different way to make sure that your image lines up with the front window. On the cards I've shown you before, I kind of would wing it and just cut my cardstock down to fit perfectly to show through the window. But in this case, I've got a different way to do it. This is one of the advantages of making several of a type of card. You learn as you go, and I wanted to share that here. I already went ahead and die cut a heart from the center top of my first note card. Now it's time to make sure our stamp lines up with that. I have a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm taking my note card and putting it over it in my stamping tool. I then am taking a piece of clear plastic and putting it on top of that. I'm putting this clear plastic here because my stamp is dirty and I didn't want any of that ink to transfer to my card. I'm lining up my image so it'll be right over that heart perfectly. I can remove the plastic and the card, and now stamp that onto our white cardstock. I am first putting down a little bow shape mask that I created so I can add a bow onto my little flower bouquet. So I stamp the bouquet with black ink, I can remove my mask, and then stamp the bow with black ink. By doing this trick where I line it up with the window that I've cut, I can be sure that this bouquet is perfectly positioned to show through the window when we assemble our card. I think this works well, but to be honest, I didn't think of it earlier when I did the other examples. Okay, next I'll be using the Pink and Main Vertical Greetings stamp set. This has some unique vertical greetings that I think are fun to stamp on the background of a card. So I took the Hello Beautiful sentiment, and I'm going to stamp it repeatedly around our heart window. I've got our card in the center of my stamping tool, and I'm starting with the sentiment right along the center. So I'll close the MISTI on this, and I will stamp it with Gina K Whisper ink. This is a great soft gray ink that'll look nice on the soft gray cardstock. You will notice that I'm actually stamping through the window itself, but that doesn't matter because when we assemble our card, you won't see that stamping. Each time I'm double stamping just to make the ink a little bit darker. Now I'm going to shift my note card down one grid line in my stamping tool, and I'll stamp it once again. This is another of the advantages of having some sort of stamping tool. You can do repeat stamping to create a great pattern on your cards. So I'm going to continue to do this, shifting down one grid line each time and stamping over and over. Once we're done with the one side of our card, we can take our card and put it back in the center of the MISTI, and then repeat the process, but this time shifting up one grid mark before stamping. I think these vertical sentiments are really fun and they tie in nicely with our main sentiment. Now I can glue white cardstock to the inside of my card, and this is where we would write our personal message. You don't have to put cardstock there, I just think it gives a complete look. Okay, now remember how we stamped on the white cardstock and that was a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece? Well, we need to trim that down just a little bit so that it'll fit nicely and show some gray cardstock around it when we glue it inside. Next, I stamped a sentiment on a thin white cardstock strip and glued it on the front of the card so it stretches across the heart window. Now that little sentiment is from the Thanks a Lot stamp set that I showed you earlier in this video. Then when you open up the card, you see more of a sentiment, and then you can open it again to see your personal message inside. I like how from the front of the card, it just looks like a heart with flowers, but when you open it up, it's a cute little bouquet. Okay, my last example for you is probably the quickest one I made because I figured everything out as I was creating. That's why, again, I think it's important to make several cards at once. You have your supplies out, you might as well use them. And each time you make a card design, you get better at it and you learn new tricks. Okay, this time I'm using the Pink and Main Pretty Jars stamp set. I thought it would be fun to have a bouquet of flowers in a jar, but there are many other images in here. You can make cute little jars of jelly, pretty much anything you want. I thought it would be good to review again how I make the two cards that fit together. So I have 2 note cards here that are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. They're from Simon Says Stamp Fog Cardstock. When I put them together, you can see the edges don't line up nicely. So here's that trick again. I cut a little bit off of one flap from both of those cards. That way, when I flip one over and I slide them together, all the sides will line up nicely. So you can see how they slide together and the edges all line up. So I'm taking my front note card, I'm laying it open, and on the front of the card, I'm putting a heart die. And I'm lining it up nicely towards the top center. So this is on the front of the card. The back of the card itself is a little bit narrow. On the back of the other card, the one that's cut a little bit short, I'm putting adhesive, and I'll glue that to the back of the front of our card that has the window. Then I'll be able to close it up and have a perfect fitting trifold card. Okay, now it's time to add that white piece that will be in the inside that has this stamping on it. So here I am doing that trick again with a pencil to cut that white piece down to be slightly smaller than the panel we're gluing it on. That way it'll have that nice light gray trim around the edge. Now this time I'm doing it yet another way to make sure I line up that stamping. And here's the trick. I hold the paper in place, close the card, and I'm tracing through the window. So I have a pencil heart on my white cardstock. Then I can line up my stamp image with that pencil heart. So this is a third way of doing this technique, and I wanted to show them all to you so you could find one that made sense to you. I think this method works the best because this will be stamped perfectly and I don't have to trim anything off the edges. So see how it lines up nicely on the inside and from the front. Before coloring it, I can go ahead and erase my pencil lines. I also thought it'd be fun to have a white frame around that heart window. But I didn't have 2 heart dies super close together in size. So I wanted to show you a trick for cutting a thin frame to go around a window. This is a great trick and I hope you give it a try. So I have the heart die that I used to cut the window itself. I'm taping it onto white cardstock and notice I'm putting the tape on the inside edge of the die. Once I have it taped well there, we want it to hold for a bit, I'm going to take my scissors and cut around the outside edge of the metal. Now remember, the die has metal on the outside edge of the cutting line. So we're cutting farther out from where the die itself will cut. So once I've cut all around the heart, I'm going to take the paper and the die and run it through my die cut machine. Any die cut machine will work. That will cut a heart out from the inside. And what we're left with is a frame. So now I have the front of my card, which by the way, I stamped some of those pattern builder stripes right around the opening. And I can use liquid adhesive to glue our little frame right around the window. I like having this little finishing touch, and using that trick of cutting around the die is a great one if you don't have 2 dies that are right close together in size. Okay, to finish it off, I stamped a sentiment on the outside. And then when you open up the card, you'll see a bouquet that's in a jar. Remember how I used that jar set? I went ahead and added a little jar there with an additional sentiment. And then we have the white space on the inside to write our personal greeting. So I hope this video showed you a fun window card design with the surprise inside, but also shows you how you can kind of rethink how you put a card together as you create additional samples. People always ask me how I come up with ideas. This is how I do it. I create a bunch, and then I end up coming up with something that I can use over and over again in the future. Okay, I have all my supplies linked below in my YouTube description. I have much more information on my blog, and that's up there on the top right corner. In the middle are a few other window video cards that you might like. I appreciate always the time that you spend here. I hope you learned a thing or two, and that we'll see you again soon. Take care.